Bienvenidos. Tenemos participantes de Colombia y otros países de Latinoamérica como Brasil, Argentina y Ecuador. Hoy más que nunca la hiperinflamación de nuestros pacientes sépticos es un reto y, como ustedes lo saben, más aún en estos momentos de pandemia. Por lo cual los citoabsorbentes se han convertido en uno de los pilares en el tratamiento de los pacientes críticos. Quiero agradecer a la AMSI por este espacio tan importante y tenemos el privilegio de contar con la participación del profesor Carlos Ronco, quien no necesita presentación, todos lo conocemos por su gran experiencia como investigador y conferencista. Actualmente director del Departamento de Nefrología, Diálisis y Trasplante del Hospital San Bartolo en Italia. Y al doctor Volker Humbert, ampliamente conocido en el mundo de la hiperinflamación y citoabsorbentes. Anestesiólogo intensivista del Hospital Universitario de Múnich. Y actualmente el doctor Volker es el director global de la terapia de citoabsorbentes. Para facilitar la conferencia, los micrófonos van a estar cerrados y las preguntas nos las pueden enviar por el chat para poderlas redireccionar a los dos speakers. En nombre del equipo de Fresenius Medical Care Colombia, les agradecemos nuevamente su participación. Adelante, profesor Ronco. Muchas gracias.
Bien. Quiero, ante todo, agradecer a los comités organizadores y a Citoabsorbents que han organizado este webinar y pedir disculpa por mi español, que como ustedes pueden ver no es perfecto, pero intentaremos hablar en una forma que nos permite de entender un poco. Me han pedido hablar Citosorb desde el pasado al futuro porque yo he tenido el privilegio de hacer las primeras experiencias en New York hace 20 años ahora con los primeros cartuchos de Citosorb. Es claro que los síndromes urémicos como el séptico se deben a los picos de las moléculas de retención y hay moléculas pequeñas como la urea, hay toxinas de peso molecular medio y también hay moléculas grandes y soludos que están unidos a las proteínas. Aquí ustedes pueden ver cómo hay una distinta característica de las diferentes moléculas que tienen un peso molecular progresivamente mayor hasta al punto de la albúmina, que es una proteína esencial y que naturalmente sería muy importante no eliminar con las terapias extracorpóreas. Utilizamos distintos mecanismos para eliminar las moléculas de retención en la terapia de purificación de la sangre, difusión, convección y absorción. Hay algunos elementos, algunas investigaciones que estudian la aplicación de órganos artificiales híbridos y donde el metabolismo puede ser posible, pero todavía no están desarrollado al punto de utilizarlo en la práctica clínica. Nosotros conocemos que, aumentando el peso molecular de la molécula hay una progresiva disminución del coeficiente de difusión en agua y también cuando hay membranas distintas, especialmente tenemos una difusión como cero en el momento del cutoff de cada membrana. Entonces, podemos esperar un aclaramiento difusivo de moléculas considerando el peso molecular. Sin embargo, la configuración estérica y la elevada filtración o convección nos ayudan a remover más moléculas de peso molecular medio grande. De lo contrario, el binding proteico, la carga eléctrica y la configuración lipofílica pueden disminuir el aclaramiento que nosotros esperamos sobre la consideración del peso molecular. Por eso, cuando vamos a aplicar la convección, conocemos muy bien las curvas de sieving y muchas moléculas, como por ejemplo el TNF-alfa, es demasiado grande para poder filtrar a través de una membrana clásica de diálisis, aunque es una membrana de alto flujo. Por eso hay razón por el uso de sorbentes y hay una eficiencia limitada de los procesos de separación de membrana, hay una posible selectividad o exclusión por tamaño del proceso de absorción y una posibilidad de poner el sorbente en contacto directo con la sangre. También, sin embargo, hay limitaciones para el uso del sorbente, tiene que ser hemocompatible, estar adecuadamente recubierto, algunas veces hay absorción no selectiva, dependiente del tamaño, que puede causar pérdidas no deseadas como antibióticos o otras moléculas, y el sorbente podría alterar el requerimiento de heparina en el circuito. Sin embargo, acoplar la absorción con la diálisis usando un sorbente puede ser una solución interesante. Esta solución ha sido aplicada hace muchos años. Específicamente, la hemoperfusión ha sido una técnica donde la sangre del paciente circula a través de un cartucho que contiene material sorbente. En este caso, el tratamiento no estaba combinado con la diálisis. En pasado, los problemas mayores estaban relacionados con la hemoperfusión con cartuchos con insuficiente compatibilidad del biomaterial utilizado como sorbente. Por eso, muchas veces había chills, fiebre, rash cutáneo, trombocitopenia, leucopenia y muy frecuentemente el tratamiento no era bien tolerado. Los requisitos para una terapia eficaz con sorbente son un material sorbente efectivo y seguro, un cartucho adecuadamente diseñado y una utilización óptima de todo el material disponible. Claramente hay requisitos para un material de sorbente adecuado, una alta selectividad que permite una buena separación, una buena capacidad para minimizar la cantidad necesaria de sorbente, una cinética favorable y propiedades de transporte para una absorción rápida, una estabilidad química y térmica y también una resistencia mecánica. Es muy importante que hay una tendencia de flujo libre para facilitar el llenado, el vaciado del lecho empacado y una alta resistencia a la flotación para una larga vida y baja interferencia de solutos, sin tendencia a promover reacciones químicas o efectos secundarios, posibilidad de regeneración. Esta es una discusión que todavía no está aclarada y relativamente un bajo costo. Para absorbir un soluto necesitamos tres fases: una fase externa al sorbente, una transferencia de masa interna y al final una difusión superficial a lo largo de la superficie porosa que termina con la absorción del soluto. La transferencia externa, también llamada interfase, depende, se puede obtener muy adecuada cuando los lechos de sorbente se rellenan cuidadosamente con partículas esféricas de igual tamaño y un nivel de empaquetamiento que tiene que ser dentro de 40-60% para permitir una buena distribución del flujo de la fase líquida como tiene que ser. Hay muchas variables, hay ley específica, pero los importantes son el diámetro de la partícula, la densidad de empaquetado, la porosidad interpartículas, tortuosidad de los canales de líquido, longitud, diámetro, viscosidad y número de Reynolds. Desde este estudios nació CytoSorb, un cartucho muy interesante que ha sido estudiado muchísimo y al final nos permite la aplicación de una hemoperfusión directa con perfusión de la sangre directa o en combinación con terapia de reemplazo renal continuo. Son perlas biocompatibles de copolímero cross-linked con divinilbenzene, 300-800 microns de diámetro, una superficie enorme de absorción. El tamaño de los poros absorbe hasta 40 kilodalton de proteínas, que es importante para tener fuera la albúmina. Contrariamente al carbón no recubierto, que es una absorción tremendamente no biocompatible, en este caso tenemos un recubrimiento superficial que nos induce una biocompatibilidad muy bien. Y se obtiene para un mecanismo, esta es una representación esquemática de una perla de sorbente con una composición superficial muy suave, no es rugosa, no es bioincompatible, y de hecho tenemos que a la superficie hay una presencia mínima de plaquetas y tampoco de fibrina o de los mecanismos de coagulación. Estas son las perlas después de 48 horas de tratamiento. La biocompatibilidad es extremadamente buena. Aquí tenemos sangre incubada con polímero y con membranas, y la biocompatibilidad parece ser mejor en términos de generación de elementos del complemento y de nitrosil hemoglobina. También necesitamos resistencia mecánica para evitar pequeños fragmentos de las perlas que se marchan en el circuito y al final en la circulación. Y tenemos una buena distribución empaquetado del sorbente en el cartucho, que hemos estudiado en distintos métodos utilizando un medio de contraste con una CT scan y también con una multiple slice high sensitivity CT scan, que nos permite de evaluar la distribución del flujo, que es extremadamente buena y homogénea, también a 250 y a 350 mililitros por minuto. Al empiezo utilizamos cartuchos solamente para investigación, pero ustedes pueden ver cómo sin de los primeros cartuchos había una distribución de la sangre extremadamente homogénea y se confirmaba con la distribución de la sangre con el medio de contraste. Aquí ustedes pueden ver el estudio que hicimos inicialmente para analizar la caída de presión dentro de los cartuchos y al final hemos entendido que no hay una significativa pérdida de presión en el sistema y el cartucho puede ser utilizado sin problemas en series con un dializador. Aquí el estudio que hicimos que demuestra una constancia de la presión arterial, venosa y de la pérdida de presión dentro del cartucho sobre horas de tratamiento. También no hay cambios plaquetarios en combinación con CytoSorb y diálisis combinadas. No hay cambios de leucocitos, sino por una pequeña hemoconcentración, como ustedes pueden ver. Y la albúmina tampoco cambia, sino por una pequeña hemoconcentración a través del tratamiento. La hidráulica y la fluidodinámica nos permite un total de vaciar el cartucho muy bien sin problema con un residuo de sangre mínimo. Aquí otra vez estudios de presión que se mantienen muy constantes sobre el tiempo de tratamiento. Hemos estudiado también la remoción de antibióticos utilizando in vitro distintos cartuchos. Como ustedes pueden ver, son muchos antibióticos y al final hemos construido isotermas que parecen que van a saturar los sitios dentro de 30 minutos. Esto es muy importante para todos estos fármacos y por los antibióticos, porque significa que después de 30 minutos no hay absorción de antibióticos y podemos conocer muy bien la cinética de estas moléculas. Es muy importante, claramente, la vancomicina en el cuidado intensivo, pero otra vez, como ustedes pueden ver, la remoción y la cumulative removal es minimal después de 30 minutos. Es muy interesante, de lo contrario, la importante remoción de citoquinas que pueden ser distintas, en ese caso TNF, IL-10, IL-6, y comparados ese estudio de John Kellum en Pittsburgh con dialyzers en distintas membranas, tenemos una reducción importante de citoquinas. Los efectos de CytoSorb in vivo es también sobre niveles circulantes de interleuquina 6. Este ha sido uno de los elementos que los ha hizo la sugerencia para utilizar CytoSorb en enfermos con COVID-19. Parece que hay, después del CytoSorb treatment, una menor activación del sistema nuclear factor kappa B, que es muy importante en la activación del proceso de activación celular y de apoptosis con la activación de caspasa. Otra vez, reducción muy importante, significativa de citoquinas en la sangre estimulada con el PS y otra vez una reducción muy importante de interleuquina 18. El producto comercial es un producto hoy muy simple, se puede aplicar antes o después del filtro integrado con CRRT, como ustedes pueden ver, pero también nosotros lo aplicamos, por ejemplo, en el circuito de extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Está indicado para condiciones clínicas con elevación de citoquinas, lo que llamamos el trastorno de citoquinas. Es muy interesante porque ha sido muchos estudios, ahora hay una biblioteca enorme de estudios con los efectos de la remoción de citoquinas en distintas condiciones clínicas, como en este estudio, por ejemplo. Es muy interesante conocer la cinética de las citoquinas en la síndrome séptica y conocer que no es importante la remoción de una citoquina, sino la remoción de múltiples moléculas inflamatorias y antiinflamatorias, y por eso el concepto de soporte inmunológico ha sido incorporado en la idea de la hipótesis de la concentración máxima o de los picos de concentración de las citoquinas, que puede ser en momentos siguientes o en el mismo momento una activación inflamatoria y antiinflamatoria del sistema inmunitario congénito y adaptativo, y también nos permiten los cartuchos de absorción de citoquinas una remoción específica de los picos de mediadores que nos puede permitir de alcanzar un nivel adecuado de inmunohomeostasis. También hemos encontrado en estudios un mejoramiento de la apoptosis patológica que se confronta con la reducción de la activación del NF-κB y la caspasa 3 y 9, y también un mejoramiento de la función fagocítica de la célula. Aquí ustedes pueden ver la reducción significativa de la apoptosis de la caspasa 3, lo estudiamos. Y también hemos estudiado con flow cytometry la activación del HLA-DR, que representa la capacidad del sistema inmunitario de presentar el antígeno. En ese caso, ustedes pueden ver cómo después del tratamiento con terapia continua y CytoSorb hay un mejoramiento significativo de la expresión de la HLA-DR que nos demuestra un mejoramiento significativo de la capacidad de presentar el antígeno. Al final podemos decir que conocimos muy bien que en el síndrome séptico y otros síndromes de trastorno citoquínico es una importante charla dentro de los órganos, lo que llamamos organ crosstalk, y por eso hemos propuesto la utilización de modificaciones del circuito extracorpóreo para alcanzar lo que llamamos extracorporeal organ support en distintos métodos, incluyendo el aspecto de la hemoperfusión. Por ejemplo, en este caso se compara CytoSorb con el sistema MARS para la remoción de sustancias importantes en la intoxicación hepática y ligada a la albumina, como la bilirrubina y los ácidos biliares, y parece que CytoSorb presenta una reducción muy importante. Como decía antes, CytoSorb ha sido utilizado en la emergencia COVID para su capacidad de remoción de distintas moléculas, incluidas las que llamamos dumps and pumps, que están filtradas del glomérulo en posibilidad de crear un daño agudo a los riñones. Y por eso en el COVID emergencia hemos propuesto la utilización de la terapia extracorpórea para la remoción de citoquinas. Este es un Nature Review. Tenemos también un papel en Lancet que se basa sobre el concepto que después de la infección hay una respuesta inmune inadecuada y luego un daño orgánico, y la remoción de citoquinas, quimoquinas, puede ser la llave para la resolución. Viral infection, hay una neumonía, hay ECMO, ventilación mecánica, puedes agravar el trastorno citoquínico con un daño endotelial y un daño de órgano, picos inflamadores y antiinflamatorios. Al final, la tormenta de citoquinas es una complicación grave del coronavirus y entonces el tratamiento precoz con fármacos ha sido propuesto, pero con resultados controversos. Al final, en la fase aguda, puede ser muy interesante la utilización de la hemoperfusión y la remoción de citoquinas para alcanzar una disminución de los picos de citoquinas y proteger el endotelio y también los órganos. Con eso me gusta terminar mi charla invitando a todos los amigos de Latinoamérica y de Colombia a nuestro meeting en noviembre. Será una entera semana, son 3 horas al día y vamos a tener charlas, conferencias y también, naturalmente, CytoSorb será uno de los elementos muy importantes de discusión con los expertos y probablemente también webinars y BT Expert Session. Le agradezco muchísimo y disculpen otra vez por mi español.
Gracias, profesor Ronco, por la excelente exposición, ¿no? El español perfecto, profesor Ronco. Muchas gracias. Les vuelvo a decir, por el chat pueden enviar las preguntas y al final de las 2 conferencias las dirigiremos a los 2 profesores invitados. Adelante, profesor Volker.
Yeah, buenos dias from my side. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present you on CytoSorb a bit in a general vision and also in regard to the current evidence. I have to apologize after this really very impressive presentation by Professor Ronco that I have to continue in English, as I don't have by far not the same Spanish as he does. But anyhow, I hope you find my presentation interesting and also informative. Well, a lot of things were already mentioned very nicely by Professor Ronco about the adsorber. That's why I just quickly want to have a look about the rationale, a bit on the pathophysiology of the setting, and as also pointed out, the fact already is that a response is the major problem in sepsis. So it's not necessarily that much the infection, but rather the dysregulated response by the organism, the so-called cytokine storm, which is then providing the further clinical deterioration. And importantly, this can not only occur after infections, but also after sterile triggers beyond infection. Also here, after severe burns, after severe trauma, a very similar dysregulated response can occur and can then end in a nearly identical clinical picture. And despite the fact that, of course, many therapeutic measures are still very much important and crucial, all of them leave out a bit to directly address the cytokine storm. So in a certain sense, there is a bit of a therapeutic gap. At least for some patients, this can be decisive. And exactly this gap, as also pointed out by Professor Ronco, is tried to be filled with CytoSorb, which is directly addressing the cytokine storm. And it's not only addressing the cytokine storm, but can also have clinical consequences, which become obvious when we look at the relationship between the cytokine storm leading to a vasoplegic shock state, which has quite well-known characteristics like capillary leakage, like refractory hypotension, like microcirculatory disorders, or like septic cardiomyopathy, and which then provides the base for the further deterioration into a multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. When we look at this connection, at this link, it's not too surprisingly that, at least from the theoretical point of view, addressing a cytokine storm means also addressing the characteristics, the clinical characteristics of the vasoplegic shock state. And meanwhile, more and more papers and publications are available in this regard. There are reports on the protection of capillary integrity with CytoSorb therapy. There are animal studies in regard to an improvement of cardiac function. There's a nice study from Italy showing improvements in microcirculation under CytoSorb therapy. And there are quite many reports available on a rapid and profound reduction of vasopressor needs. So overall, the major therapeutic target of CytoSorb therapy is hemodynamic stabilization and shock control or even shock reversal. And it should be used when the classical standard measures are not sufficient enough to provide an adequate hemodynamic stabilization. So CytoSorb, also this is very important, is not replacing the other standard measures. It's an adjunctive therapy which should come into the game when the other measures are not good enough to support things, and here in the major regard or in the main field, the hemodynamic situation sufficiently. And supported by data and also supported again by pathophysiology, it's important to start CytoSorb rather sooner than later. So you shouldn't be too late with starting CytoSorb therapy, and based on the current evidence, this means that ideally you should start with CytoSorb therapy 6 to 24 hours after the start of your standard therapy based on the diagnosis of sepsis or septic shock. Of course, depending on the overall clinical situation, you might start even earlier. So experienced users sometimes even start in parallel with standard therapy. Again, not to replace standard therapy, but as they assume a further clinical deterioration, that's why I want to be with CytoSorb as early as possible. A start later than 48 hours after the diagnosis or start of standard therapy should rather be considered individually due to overall decreasing chances of success. In the end, it's a very individual decision. And all this is contributing to CytoSorb therapy being a very targeted therapy against hyperinflammation. In intensive care medicine, we have many measures against specific problems like infection, hypovolemia, vasodilation, certain insufficiencies, but not that many things specifically directed at hyperinflammation. And a bit more clinically, it's also about hemodynamic stabilization. And as hyperinflammation, as I said in the beginning, can not only occur after infection, but also after other triggers, is actually quite frequently given in many situations on the ICU, which why, from the potential point of view, many indications for CytoSorb therapy are given, and the major ones are listed here. So it's not only refractory septic shock, but also vasoplegic shock states, for example, after major surgery or in conjunction with ECMO therapy, some very sophisticated syndromes like the toxic shock syndrome, necrotizing fasciitis, and some other conditions, as I pointed out, like severe burn, severe trauma, which can also be associated with hyperinflammation. Let's have a look at the development of the clinical evidence. So CytoSorb therapy in septic shock, there's a nice progression of the available literature, and it all started very early with a multi-center RCT. Importantly, this was conducted even before the CE certificate was achieved. So with all due respect to the authors back then, of course, there was a certain lack in regard to the optimal timing, optimal dosing of CytoSorb therapy. And the major idea of this study was to show safety and feasibility, which was done. Later on, more clinically related results are available, and one of those is a nice case series from Dr. Kogelmann from northern Germany on 26 patients that had a septic shock and quite high levels of Apache 2. Of course, also those patients were treated regarding the current guidelines, but there wasn't any signal in regard to any improvement in norepinephrine, even after additional corticoid treatment. And then those patients were additionally in need for a CRRT treatment, which was then started, but together with CytoSorb. It was a bit of a mix of rather a surgical origin of the sepsis or abdominal origin, or rather pneumonic origin. And now when you look here at this table, you can see a clear difference, despite a more or less same severity of disease, between those patients that had been treated in the very early phase, so within the first 24 hours, and those that have been treated beyond 48 hours in regard to the outcome. A study from Dr. Friesike, also Germany, has looked at 20 consecutive patients with refractory septic shock. This refractory situation was quite nicely defined by the study protocol. So despite full standard therapy and even the use of advanced hemodynamic monitoring, those patients were in a progressive shock state. They had elevated levels of lactate and relatively high needs for norepinephrine that even had increased over the last 2 hours before then CytoSorb was started. the IL-6 levels had to be above 1,000 picogram per milliliters. And you could see, as the two illustrations show here nicely, with the start of CytoSorb therapy, there was a nice significant decrease of the norepinephrine needs and a nice significant increase in the lactate clearance. And from the clinical point of view in regard to shock reversal, you can see here once more, it was about 20 patients. And when you look at the SOFA score, the interleukin levels being around 25,000 as a median value, and the levels of norepinephrine at the start of CytoSorb therapy being 1.6 microgram per kilogram per minute, I think the results in regard to 65% of the patients have achieved shock reversal can be seen as quite nicely. Another interesting pilot RCT from Scholt-Molner's group from Hungary looked at CytoSorb therapy as a standalone therapy. So here also 20 patients were included. They were all on mechanical ventilations. The norepinephrine needs were slightly lower. PCT levels had to be elevated, but as an important difference to the results I showed you before, those patients had to be without the need for RRT. And then those patients were randomized into a CytoSorb group and a control group, and it was made sure that the CytoSorb therapy started within the first 24 hours after ICU admission or onset of septic shock. And as it was a pilot approach, only one single adsorber was used per patient, even if we know that some patients might require rather 2 or 3 or even 4 adsorbers. Anyhow, also here, Professor Molner could show nice results in regard to the hemodynamic stabilization, so around 70% decrease of the norepinephrine needs and a profound reduction of the PCT levels, as well as reductions in the big ET1 levels. Some studies, not the Scholt-Molner group, but other studies made a comparison between the expected mortality on the observed mortality. So here, the Friesiker study I showed you before, the case series from Dr. Kogelmann I showed you before, but another case series from Italy, not necessarily in septic shock, but in cardiogenic shock. And I think the fundamental or the principal problem is similar, as also those patients can occur or can show up with a very profound cytokine storm. And so here the comparisons were done, and I'm very much aware of the limitations of calculating mortality based on clinical scores. It was either the Apache 2 score or the SOFA score, but I think from a certain difference on with the observed mortality, the results at least become interesting. And here CytoSorb was associated with a clear reduction of the observed mortality and reductions up to 35% of the relative risk in regard to the mortality expected could be shown. A very recent study from Netherlands was further trying to highlight also the mortality aspect of CytoSorb therapy. He was looking, or the authors were looking at overall 200 patients or more than 200 patients that had received either CytoSorb therapy plus CRT or CRT alone. It was a respective approach, and after some exclusions, they had 67 patients in the CytoSorb group compared to 49 patients that received only CRT treatment. And also here, a comparison was done between the expected mortality based on the SOFA score and the observed mortality. And also here, a very nice reduction of the relative risk could be shown, which nicely fits into the results of the other studies I have shown beforehand. However, the authors moved one step further on and tried to mimic an RCT, because as this was retrospective, the treating physician was quite free in his choice who to select for CytoSorb therapy and who not. And that's why the baseline characteristics were of course not equal, because mainly the patients that were not stabilizing properly after standard therapy had received CytoSorb therapy. So there was an approach to compensate this by a mathematical model. And I'm not a statistician. The model is called inverse probability of treatment weights. And I don't want to go further into detail, but after having adjusted for those differences, so after having tried to mimic a more RCT approach, the results were as follows. And based on this comparison, more than 25% relative risk reduction in the CytoSorb group could be seen now in regard to a control group, which was treated only with CRT. And if you translate this, you could say that one of the 4 patients requiring CRT that would have died from septic shock could be saved by adding cytosol therapy to the treatment. You can also calculate a number needed to treat, which would be 5. Of course, this is not an RCT, despite all the statistical approaches, and those results have to be further confirmed by RCT. But I think anyhow, it's a very nice signal in regard to CytoSorb also having positive effects on mortality. Another very recent and very interesting study is looking at the use of CytoSorb and ECMO in pneumogenic sepsis. So here, 13 patients in a prospective manner were included and compared to 7 patients of a control group. And also here, CytoSorb was associated or could show a more profound stabilization of hemodynamics, a more profound reduction of vasopressor levels, and also CRP and PCT levels. And the authors did also do a comparison in regard to the mortality. In a way, it looks too good to be true because the 30-day mortality was 0% in the CytoSorb group compared with a rather to be expected 57% in the control group. They even did a follow-up around 2.5 months in the CytoSorb group, and so far all the patients remained alive. I think the 0% is really a very surprising number, but anyhow, what stays is a very profound difference in regard to mortality also to the control group. Looking at all this together, I think there's a nice progression in regard to the evidence in the field of septic shock. But as I've also said, you can also count one or the other result from other settings in this regard, because overall the approach of CytoSorb to control the cytokine storm, to address systemic hyperinflammation is not too different, whether it's used in septic shock or whether it's used in, for example, cardiogenic shock, even if, of course, the clinical pictures might vary. And all this evidence is, of course, not the final evidence, but it's further on pieces of the puzzle. And we are very much aware that in the end, also RCTs are needed to further conclude and fill this puzzle with more pieces. And some RCTs are already on its way. Others RCTs are being planned and hopefully started soon. So the current summary looks like this. When we look at all the data in regard to septic shock which are available, we can definitely see a very high safety. Overall, more than 100 RCT patients were included, more than 1,000 registry patients are there. The current interim analysis is already submitted, covering nearly 1,000 patients, and they state that there were no adverse device-related events. Generally, there are nearly 90,000 treatments being performed so far worldwide, and also this is further, the results we have from this is further contributing to the high safety. The major effect, as I said, is rapid hemodynamic stabilization and vasopressor reduction. Some studies already report about differences between observed and expected mortality of more than 30%. And the study I just showed you from the Netherlands, and they are currently performing a follow-up of those patients, which hopefully will be published in the nearer future. This study could also show an expected mortality difference versus a control group of nearly 20%. I want to have a quick outlook or some words on CytoSorb therapy in COVID-19 patients, as this is still a very hot topic, of course. From the pathophysiologic point of view, and this was also very nicely presented by Professor Ronco, it's not too fundamentally different from sepsis in a certain way. Also here, the problem is not only the virus infection, but also the response of at least some of the patients, which can make even more clinical problems. And this was quite early in the course of COVID-19 addressed by Professor Ronco and some co-authors like Paolo Navalesi and Jean-Le Vincent, who stated that this sepsis-like syndrome is likely to occur quite frequently. So there's a problem of a cytokine storm. And due to this and due to other aspects, you should consider approaches like chemoadsorption that can remove cytokines and mediators from the blood in this context. And since then, many articles highlighted the presence of a dysregulated immune response or the presence of a cytokine storm. And a very nice one among those is also this article by Tay et al. From Nature Reviews Immunology, who also mentions CytoSorb and also states that the control of this inflammatory response may be as important as targeting the virus. And this is further supported by some results we have, or generally which are available, that sometimes this overshooting inflammatory response recurs when actually the virus load has gone down already. So a good antiviral therapy does not always guarantee that the patient is not getting into a hyperinflammatory situation, which then had to be addressed separately. Some clinical criteria when to consider CytoSorb therapy in those COVID-19 patients are presented here, and they are based on either clinical guidelines, which are available, or some experiences which are not yet documented, but we have received from the field, or which are kind of based on the pathophysiology. And there are guidelines from Panama, who state that profound vasoplegia with elevated of lactate, high levels of vasopressors can be seen as one criteria to consider CytoSorb therapy. So this is very much in line with our current recommendations in regard to septic shock, which might occur in some of those COVID-19 patients, but others rather show with a primarily respiratory problem, so ARDS, and also here, for example, supported by a handbook of COVID-19 management from China. It suggested when you have levels of moderate ARDS, the authors don't use these expressions, but they have oxygenation levels as a kind of categorization. And so roughly at the level of a moderate ARDS, based on the Berlin definition, are criteria for using CytoSorb therapy or using blood purification in regard to anti-cytokine storm therapy. Panama is also listing the start of ECMO therapy as a very useful and reasonable criteria of also initiating CytoSorb therapy, as CytoSorb can easily be integrated into an ECMO circuit. And then based on the findings that the cytokine profile of quite some patients is similar to the secondary hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, the idea came up to use also this diagnosis as an initiation of using CytoSorb therapy. A CytoSorb was quite successfully used already in HLH, and there's an H-score available to simplify diagnosis of HLH in this setting. And last but not least, the recommendations from Italy, a country which had hit really hard in Europe by COVID-19. Here, the nephrologist from Brescia came up with recommendations to initiate CRRT at the level of AKI 3 and also CytoSorb therapy with CRRT for at least 48 hours. When we look at what's available in regard to CytoSorb and COVID-19, we assume that so far more than 1,000 patients have been treated with CytoSorb therapy worldwide. Unfortunately, the documentation is still sometimes missing because the doctors had such a high workload that this unfortunately was missing. Anyhow, studies are on its way, case reports, case series are submitted but not yet published. But some of these experiences are available on our website as they were presented in webinars. And I tried to summarize this a little bit. This is not very scientific, it's because it was different patient and patient groups. But anyhow, you could see that in nearly all the cases, CytoSorb therapy was associated with hemodynamic stabilization and vasopressor reduction, also improvement in oxygenation, and if measured, IL-6 level could be reduced. The level of IL-6 was really varying a lot. Baseline values were between 100 and up to over 500,000 picogram per milliliter. There were some comparisons done with control groups. There's a case series from Italy comparing 11 CytoSorb patients with 10 control patients, and there they could show signals towards a potential mortality benefit and a better lung function. Of course, signals not statistically significant, but first signals. And other comparisons of randomized patients could show a more profound and faster IL-6 reduction. There was also comparisons between earlier and later start. And again here, the earlier CytoSorb group benefited from this treatment start. And overall, I think this is also important, there were no device-related adverse events reported. And with this, I'm nearly at the end of my presentation. One more thing, which is not a new iPhone, but as Professor Ronco nicely pointed out, there's a recent publication which has compared CytoSorb therapy and Mars therapy, and potentially CytoSorb therapy is a new very, very important and very promising therapeutic option in the field of liver failure, as it's providing not only liver toxin removal, removing bile acids, bilirubin, ammonia, but also immunomodulation, which is often needed in those patients due to a systemic hyperinflammation present. So you might stop the vicious cycle of autointoxication, and you might also address a dysregulated immune response. So you can have a place here potentially with CytoSorb in liver failure, in septic shock with liver failure, or in COVID-19 patients, as they were reported also to have relatively high rate of liver failure. Of course, there's still a learning curve to be done. Generally, also we from the company are learning anew every single day. I'd like to encourage you to make your own experiences. As Albert Einstein rightly said, learning is experience. I think you're in good company. As you see here, the numbers, there are more and more treatments being done, up to 90,000 so far worldwide. And with this, more and more scientifically documented patients and treatments, more and more publications, more and more patients in the registry, which is run by Professor Brunkhorst from Jena. And of course, this is still needed. More and more studies are on its way. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention. I don't say it in Spanish, I just put it here like this, and I'm open for questions. Thank you very much.
Gracias, profesor Humbert, por la excelente exposición. Voy a comenzar a leer las preguntas que nos han enviado por el chat y las vamos enviando a cada uno de los expositores. Entonces, comenzamos con la primera pregunta para el profesor Ronco, desde Colombia. Profesor Ronco, CytoSorb se puede colocar pre o post filtro, como lo vimos en la presentación, pero ¿existe alguna indicación específica para montarlo pre o post filtro? ¿Es solamente por criterio médico? Muchas gracias. Adelante, profesor Ronco.
Bueno, hicimos muchos estudios para poner el cartucho antes o luego o después del filtro y depende muchísimo si hacemos un tratamiento que implica una ultrafiltración muy elevada y entonces puede alcanzar una hemoconcentración muy alta. En ese caso es mejor poner el cartucho antes del filtro. Si vamos a considerar la posible remoción desde sustancias en el filtro, entonces poniendo el cartucho después del filtro vamos a saturarlo más tarde. También es importante considerar que el cartucho puede alcanzar una absorción de sustancias relacionadas con la bioincompatibilidad del filtro o con reacciones que pueden ocurrir dentro del filtro. Entonces, es una indicación médica muy sencilla de ponerlo después del filtro en la mayoría de los casos.
Gracias, profesor Ronco. Seguimos con la pregunta para el doctor Humbert. Félix, por favor.
Okay, taking into account that sepsis is a heterogeneous condition with different phenotypes in the host's immune response, is it possible that the response with CytoSorb is variable? Do you think that mortality should not be an outcome to be evaluated as a primary objective in the studies?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and I can fully agree with this comment that, of course, sepsis is not fully understood, and definitely there are different phenotypes and many things might contribute not only to the outcome with CytoSorb, but also to the overall outcome in regard to mortality. And from that point of view, I personally would rather not use mortality as the primary objective in the studies we are planning. It's rather time to shock reversal, vasopressor reduction, as we know that this is also a very important contribution to the overall outcome. And mortality is, of course, affected by so many different aspects, and overall the patients are really sick, and not everything can be addressed by CytoSorb. So only blaming CytoSorb if mortality cannot be improved, I think, is very short-sighted. But still, many clinicians, and somehow understandably, still want to focus on this relationship, or at least on this outcome parameter. That's why we try to address it again and again, but not necessarily in studies, as we don't think fully in agreement with you that this is the perfect or ideal primary outcome parameter.
Thank you, Profesor Volker. Pregunta para el doctor Ronco. ¿Se puede utilizar CytoSorb en terapia SLED o solo en terapia continua?
No, es posible utilizarlo de todas las distintas situaciones. Claramente no hay limitaciones en este aspecto.
Gracias, profesor. Al profesor Ronco también. Si la dexametasona para el proceso de hiperinflamación se da por 10 días, ¿cuánto han considerado con CytoSorb?
Bueno, esta es una pregunta muy interesante que nos lleva en el problema más importante de la terapia de absorción, que es cuándo empezarla, cuánto continuarla y cuándo terminar la terapia. Y yo creo que hicimos hasta ahora tratamientos bastante cortos y puede ser que es mejor planearlo para un periodo de más días y también de más horas. Por eso necesitamos estudiar la isoterma de la absorción de la distinta sustancia para alcanzar informaciones cuándo tenemos que cambiar el cartucho y cuándo, hasta a qué punto podemos mantenerlo. Es una pregunta que todavía no tiene una respuesta perfectamente aclarada.
Gracias, profesor. La pregunta para el doctor Humbert. ¿Cuál es el tiempo ideal para la terapia con CytoSorb? Félix.
What's the ideal time, I think, or somehow I can guess. Am I right, Felix? Yeah.
Yes, correct. Sorry, my microphone.
Okay. Yeah, the ideal timing. I try to highlight this to our current understanding, to the current evidence. The ideal timing is between the first 6 and 24 hours after the onset of septic shock or begin of your standard therapy in this regard. So when you wait longer, for 2, 3, 4 days, you will still be able to reduce the levels of inflammatory mediators in the blood. So CytoSorb is still doing its job, but it's very likely that the results that have been done by this inflammatory attack are already kind of irreversible. So the clinical picture might not change. That's why you should really try to target the rather reversible phase. And so when you start within the 24 hours, based on the results, based on pathophysiology, chances of success are much higher. That's one aspect, but it should also not be forgotten that there are patients where you have to continue with a second adsorber, with a third adsorber. Normally, you use an adsorber for up to 24 hours. However, in the very initial treatment, when you try to treat as intense as possible, it might also make sense, at least for the first adsorber, to replace this after already 12 hours. In the end, it's very individual, but I think you shouldn't wait for days. Watch the people not stabilizing under normal therapy and then only come to the conclusion with CytoSorb, but rather do this within the first 24 hours.
Yeah.
Gracias, doctor Humbert. Para el doctor Ronco, ¿cuáles son las contraindicaciones del producto? ¿Se puede utilizar en niños y en personas en embarazo, en mujeres en embarazo?
Yo creo que no hay contraindicaciones absolutas, sino hay contraindicaciones relativas y un estudio que hicimos hace muchos años es la absorción de hormonas, que es muy importante, muy interesante, especialmente para la mujer embarazada. y también por los niños. La otra cosa es la absorción de sustancias como los antibióticos, que no representa una contraindicación, pero representa un warning. Es muy importante conocer la cinética de la absorción del antibiótico para alcanzar niveles de antibióticos circulante en el enfermo deseados. Entonces, no son contraindicación absoluta, pero son indicaciones de atención, de cuidado.
Gracias, profesor. Pregunta para el doctor Humbert. ¿Cuáles son las complicaciones de la terapia y qué tipo de anticoagulación es la ideal?
So what are the complications of the cytosol therapy and what type of anticoagulation is ideal?
Yeah, I think cytosol therapy has a very favorable safety profile. So we're not aware of real complications, but what was addressed also by Professor Ronco nicely, one has to be, of course, aware of potential unwanted drug removal in regard to antibiotic therapy or immunosuppressant therapy in case of, let's say, transplant patients. We are further investigating this. Luckily, it seems that in the majority of the cases, there shouldn't be a major effect by cytosol therapy. Ideally, those drug levels should be monitored because there are many reasons for those drug levels being affected, and cytosol therapy is only one potential reason. But this, I think, is the major complication we are aware of. Apart from that, it's a very biocompatible system, not activating any systems in regard to coagulation or complement system, only associated with a low loss of platelets, no significant removal of albumin, so quite safe from that point of view. Anticoagulation can be done either as a regional citrate anticoagulation or with heparin. Also other low molecular weight heparins are used. The PTT should be around 60 seconds, but generally anticoagulation does not have to be altered for CytoSorb to our knowledge. So you don't need an extra dose just because now CytoSorb is now in the circuit. So this level of anticoagulation, which is good enough for the normal extracorporeal circuit, let it be ECMO, let it be CPB, or let it be CRRT, should be also good enough when CytoSorb is additionally used.
Gracias, profesor Volker. Esta pregunta para el doctor Ronco. Muchos de los pacientes COVID-19 que incluso desarrollan lesión renal con marcadores de inflamación como ferritina, LDH, dímero D elevados con SDRA, no requieren soporte vasopresor. ¿Serán estos criterios suficientes para hablar de hiperinflamación o darles el beneficio de la terapia de hemoperfusión?
No soy seguro de entender completamente la pregunta, pero los enfermos de COVID-19 tienen distintos niveles de severidad y muchas veces desarrollan un trastorno citoquímico no en el primer día, sino en el tercero o el quinto día cuando están en cuidado intensivo y desarrollan un progresivo nivel de inflamación que normalmente se puede observar hasta un punto donde el enfermo desarrolla una estabilidad hemodinámica. Y ese es el momento donde nosotros pensamos, hacemos la sugerencia que el tratamiento con absorción tiene que empezar. Para alcanzar los resultados interesantes es importante no empezar demasiado adelante. Todos los enfermos pueden tener buenos outcomes independientemente de la terapia y tampoco empezar muy tarde. Todos los enfermos pueden tener pésimo outcome al final. Es una ventana de oportunidad en el medio y los parámetros inflamatorios son muy importantes para indicar cuándo empezar. Nosotros hemos empezado antes, por ejemplo, que un fracaso renal agudo se va a desarrollar. Porque el significado, yo pienso, de una terapia como esa es una terapia protectiva más que hacer un tratamiento al final. Como decía el doctor Humbert, la función está bien, pero el beneficio por el enfermo es más temprano.
Gracias, profesor. Última pregunta aquí para el doctor Volker. Teniendo en cuenta que CytoSorb está indicado en medio de una tormenta inflamatoria, ¿en qué momento se puede considerar que el paciente no tiene una respuesta favorable o que está teniendo una respuesta inflamatoria por no compatibilidad? ¿En qué momento se debe suspender la terapia? Félix.
Okay, in the moment of this elevated cytokine storm, when is the precise moment where we know where we should stop CytoSorb therapy because it doesn't give any effect, or whether we should continue with another adsorber to continue with CytoSorb?
It's a very good but also a very tricky question. To our current understanding, one should never give up before he has used the second adsorber. I think at least you should use 2 adsorbers and then within the first 24 hours. So changing the adsorber after 12 hours to the second adsorber. And then after those 2 adsorbers or even the third one, you don't see any effect and rather an ongoing deterioration. I think this might be a time where you really consider also ending CytoSorb therapy. But this cannot be said for all the patients. We also have patients that simply needed a longer time to be accompanied or treated with CytoSorb. You always have to keep in mind that CytoSorb is, of course, very effective in regard to removing cytokines from the blood. However, when an ongoing production is present, if the focus is not cured, is not sorted, then it's a kind of fight against the new production, and this sometimes might take a while until things are really going the right direction and the patient is brought towards recovery. So that's why we have also situations where CytoSorb was needed for 4, 5, 6 adsorbers, and only after the third adsorber certain clinical progressions were seen, and then finally the patient recovered. So it's difficult to say in general, but kind of 1 adsorber and then giving up is definitely, I think, too early. And just one last comment in regard to the anticoagulation question beforehand, which I somehow didn't address beforehand, what we learn from the feedback we have from users, and I don't think that this is due to CytoSorb, that COVID-19 patients are really hypercoagulable. So they have this hypercoagulopathy, which is explained by a very profound activation also of the complement system. So there are many patients developing strokes, developing pulmonary embolisms, and those patients might generally require slightly higher levels of anticoagulation for extracorporeal circuits. So here you might rather target PTT levels around 80. Again, I don't think that this is due to CytoSorb. In theory, CytoSorb might even have a positive impact on this activation of the complement system, as it's also removing activated C3 and 5. But in any way, one should be aware of this hypercoagulopathy in COVID-19 patients, which might lead to easier clotting or more frequent clotting in extracorporeal circuits, with or without CytoSorb. But just one more remark in this regard, I think, which is important.
Gracias, profesor Volker. Y la última pregunta para el doctor Ronco. Su experiencia en un paciente que está anticoagulado con citrato, ¿lo recomienda mejor que la heparina o cambiar citrato a heparina si se le coloca CytoSorb?
Nosotros tenemos solamente experiencia con heparina en estos enfermos, no hemos tenido experiencia con citrato. Estoy de acuerdo con el profesor Humbert que son enfermos que tienen necesidad de elevada anticoagulación porque están en un estado muy hipercoagulable. Sin embargo, lo que pasa con esos enfermos es el mismo que pasa con los enfermos sépticos, es que son muy heterogéneos, son muy fenotípicamente distintos y por eso será muy difícil hacer un estudio randomizado controlado que no alcanza una respuesta a nuestra cuestión. Es más importante, yo pienso, emplear una medicina muy personalizada, donde la experiencia del médico y la característica del enfermo hace la sugerencia de cuándo empezar, de qué tipo de anticoagulación utilizar, de cuándo discontinuar y también cuáles son los efectos de la terapia. Porque yo creo realmente que si nosotros vamos a poner todos los enfermos en un estudio y son muy heterogéneos, los resultados pueden ser positivo, negativo o neutro y esto va a comprometer el estudio y tampoco necesitamos utilizar endpoints como la mortalidad en esos casos porque hay muchísimos otros factores que pueden inducir cambios y entonces es muy importante definir lo que esperamos de la terapia y si la terapia hace lo que nosotros esperamos de la terapia y qué es lo que la terapia tiene en el label. Si intentamos reducir las citoquinas, vamos a reducir las citoquinas. No es posible predecir si ese efecto será un efecto importante sobre la mortalidad final.
Gracias, profesor Ronco. Gracias, profesor Volker. Excelente, muchas gracias. Y muchas gracias a todos por asistir a este webinar. Va a quedar grabado en la AMSI y si alguna pregunta especial se la haremos después y se las enviaremos a su mail. Muchas gracias, profesores, muy gentiles.
A ustedes.
Bye-bye, thank you.